September 20th, 1863, northern Georgia, a place called Chickamauga Creek. What started as a silent dawn has become a storm of fire and confusion. Among the tangled woods and burning leaves, the men of Texas fight, not for conquest, but for survival.
The smoke was so thick, we couldn't tell where our line ended or theirs began. Somewhere ahead, General Dashler had gone forward, and now word came back. He was dead.
It was the South's last great chance in the West, won with blood and lost in silence. But in those woods, the men from Texas carved their place into history. This is the story of Texans at the Battle of Chickamauga. The summer of 1863 had been cruel to the South. In Mississippi, Vicksburg fell on the 4th of July, the last Confederate stronghold on the Mississippi River, and with it, the western half of the Confederacy was split in two. In Tennessee, Union forces pushed Braxton Bragg's army out of Chattanooga and across the border into northern Georgia. To the Confederacy, it seemed the West was slipping away. But Bragg was not finished. Reinforced by fresh divisions from Mississippi and veterans from Virginia, he prepared to strike back, where the land favored the defender. Chickamauga Creek. The Cherokee called it River of Death. Dense forests, twisting ravines, broken farmland, ideal country for a trap. And into this tangled ground marched the men from Texas. Some had fought at Shiloh, others had bled at Gettysburg. They came as infantry and cavalry from Mississippi to Virginia. And now they would meet the enemy in the thickets of northern Georgia.
The Battle of Chickamauga is significant on two fronts. One is in Braxton Bragg's career, one is in the history of the Confederacy itself. Bragg, by the early fall, late summer of 63, September of 63, we'll say, has managed to lose most of Tennessee. Now, this is after the failure of his Kentucky operations in 62, his not very clear victory at Stones River in January 63, and then in the summer of 63, he's driven all the way out of Tennessee by William S. Rosecrans in what we call the Tullahoma Campaign. So he's sitting down in North Georgia licking his wounds and probably looking at being shunted off to some corner of the Confederacy if he can't call one more big favor from his good friend, Jefferson Davis, president of the Confederacy. For the Confederacy, they've just lost the key railroad junction to bring in support, reinforcements, or operating anywhere west of the East Coast states. Chattanooga is where all the lines go through, and unless they can build or reshape some others, that's going to be a major hindrance to any operations in the West. So Bragg has to win. He has to take Chattanooga back or any other portions of Tennessee that he can take. Meanwhile, the Confederacy needs that railroad junction in order to continue holding on to any portions of what they have left of the western states.
Texans from all over the Confederacy begin converging on northern Georgia. Brigadier General Matthew Duncan Ector arrives with his brigade fresh from the blood-soaked fields of Murfreesboro, ordered to reinforce Bragg's Army of Tennessee. James Dashler, a newly minted brigadier and West Point man, leads his gritty brigade of Texas infantry and dismounted cavalry into the wooded hills near Chickamauga Creek. Brigadier General John Gregg, once the colonel of the 7th Texas Infantry captured at Fort Donelson, now commands a mixed brigade of Texans and Tennesseans marching in from Mississippi under Longstreet's banner. From Virginia, Jerome B. Robertson's Texas Brigade, Lee's veterans, arrive just as the battle is about to commence, and John A. Wharton's Texas Cavalry scouts the flanks, skirmishing every step of the way. Together, these Texans are about to step into one of the bloodiest chapters of the war. September 18th dawned with fog in the valleys and tension in the air. Bragg's army moved across Chickamauga Creek, hoping to turn the Union left and strike before Rosecrans could regroup. But Union cavalry was already in motion, watching, skirmishing, delaying every step. The first Texans to fire a shot were John Gregg's men, including the battle-hardened 7th Texas Infantry, still under the command of Hiram Granberry. At Reed's Bridge, Gregg's brigade ran headlong into Colonel Minty's Union cavalry, sparking a running fight that lasted most of the day. The fighting was fierce and disjointed. The Union horsemen gave ground only after a bitter contest, buying precious time for Rosecrans's army to react. Elsewhere, the rest of the Texans waited. In the dark woods near Alexander's Bridge, Ector's dismounted cavalry scanned the far bank for movement. Further south, Dashler's brigade, packed with men from half a dozen Texas regiments, listened to the distant echo of gunfire. And just arriving from Virginia, Hood's Texas Brigade moved into position with Longstreet's corps, still uncertain of what lay ahead. For Gregg's men, the fight had begun. For the others, it was coming. At dawn on Saturday, September 19th, Ector's soldiers cooked breakfast near the charred ruins of the Alexander House. Shortly after 8 a.m., the 1,200-man brigade, composed of 5 understrength Texas cavalry and infantry regiments, the 29th North Carolina, and a mix of Alabama and Mississippi sharpshooters, received their orders and advanced north up Jay's Mill Road to reinforce Confederate skirmishers east of Chickamauga Creek. Their mission: to apply pressure to the Union flank near Reed's Bridge. Ector deployed his regiments across the Reed's Bridge Road. At 9:15 a.m., they struck the Federal lines commanded by Colonel Ferdinand Vanderveer. The fighting was fierce and confused. Dense thickets and narrow fields offered little advantage to either side. From the ranks of the 2nd Minnesota, on the Union left flank, Jeremiah Donahauer recalled the first attack by Ector's veterans.
Soon over the little rise, the heads of a solid line of men in gray coming toward us in something like a rush. We greeted them with a telling volley.
Samuel H. Sprott, captain of the Alabama sharpshooters, recalled the opening barrage as murderous fire that checked the Confederate advance. General Ector had his horse killed under him and was himself wounded, but didn't leave the field. But the brigade withdrew to regroup. Despite being wounded, Matthew Ector led his brigade forward once more. The Texans surged up Reed's Bridge Road, determined to renew their attack on Vanderveer's Federals. For a moment, the advance seemed to gain traction. Union lines wavered under the renewed pressure. But then, from the left, disaster. Brigadier General John King's U.S. regulars, 5 battalions strong, smashed into Ector's exposed flank. The blow was overwhelming. Under relentless fire and short on ammunition, Ector's brigade collapsed in disorder. Many were cut off and captured. Among the wounded was Colonel William H. Young of the 9th Texas, shot in the chest while trying to hold the line. With command structure crumbling, it was Captain Constantine Buck Kilgore, Ector's adjutant, who gathered the shattered remnants and led them back toward Jay's Mill. For Ector's Texans, the fight was over for the day. By early afternoon, the roar of battle had shifted south along Lafayette Road. While other Confederate brigades were locked in brutal combat, Brigadier General John Gregg's brigade, Texans and Tennesseans, hardened by campaigns in Mississippi, had thus far remained in reserve. By 2 p.m. on September 19th, Union Brigadier General Hans Hegg ordered his Federal Brigade across Lafayette Road. His men pressed into the dense Georgia timber east of the road. The 8th Kansas, under the command of Colonel John Martin, led the way. The Kansans followed their mascot, a barking black dog named Old Soldier. They soon encountered Gregg's pickets. The first wave of Yankees poured over the rise and opened fire. Firing from behind trees, fallen logs, and the rocky ledge, the Confederates unleashed a devastating volley at Hegg's front line. As the Federals pushed forward, heavy musketry erupted. Gregg's men, veterans of earlier campaigns, held their ground, but Hegg's regiments attacked with determination. The battle degenerated into brutal, up-close combat in the woods, with casualties mounting and nearly half of his officers wounded. Gregg made a bold decision: attack. Moving through tangled forest, they struck the Union line along a stretch of road that would soon be littered with casualties.
The rebels advanced with a shout, pouring into our ranks the most deadly volleys. We were beaten back. The ground was now one heap of mangled bodies. Men fell like the leaves of autumn.
Martin's Kansans eventually pulled back under intense enemy fire, leaving their beloved mascot dead in the woods. The dog had plenty of company. Around 3:30 p.m., the fighting in the woods began to fade, with both sides exhausted and bloodied. But for Gregg, the day's dangers were not yet over. Later that afternoon, while scouting the terrain beyond his lines, General John Gregg rode into danger. He spotted a group of soldiers ahead and called out, "Who are you?" They answered calmly, "The 64th Ohio." Realizing too late he was among the enemy, Gregg wheeled his horse and spurred it away. A rifle cracked. The bullet struck Gregg in the neck, knocking him from his saddle. He fell to the ground, motionless. The Federals stripped him of his saber and pistols, but assumed he was dead. As dusk settled, skirmishers from the Texas Brigade found Gregg, barely conscious, hidden beneath leaves and brush. They carried him to a field hospital, saving his life. Gregg's brigade had held their ground at heavy cost. Their stubborn resistance, and the near loss of their commander, marked one of the fiercest engagements of September 19th. The woods of Chickamauga bore witness to their valor.
We're at the Chickamauga National Military Park, standing next to the tablet that marks the spot of Hood's Texas Brigade on the afternoon of September the 19th. This is the Vineyard Alexander Road, and across the street is the Vineyard East Field. Behind me you can see Lafayette Road in the distance. The brigade had been in reserve during Gregg's fight against Hans Hegg's Federals, but at 4 p.m., Hood ordered the brigade into the fight.
The Texans pressed their attack through the Vineyard farm fields, now joined by General Henry Benning's Georgia Brigade. Casualties mounted quickly. In the 4th Texas, Lieutenant Colonel J.P. Bain and Captain Robert Bassett were both wounded, forcing Captain James T. Hunter to take command. Twice, Hunter reported that the fighting grew so savage that men resorted to clubbing each other with muskets and stabbing with bayonets. Yet, despite the carnage, the Texans held their ground at the Vineyard Farm.
I'm just off the Glenn Viniard Road. Glen Field is just behind me, and the Lafayette Road is just over to our left. The Vineyard Farm would have been just behind me. Jerome Robertson hated to relinquish the ground that his men had fought and bled for. But with no reinforcements in sight, he knew that holding this position was impossible. He gave the order. The Texans and Benning's Georgians would fall back across Lafayette Road, seeking cover once again in the woods.
The Texas Brigade really did a good job fighting. But one thing about, they noted that the Union soldiers in the Western Theater fought a lot braver and a lot tougher than the Army of the Potomac. A lot of the soldiers from the Texas Brigade said that the Union soldiers in the Western Theater knew what they were all about, that they were frontiersmen. And they did not just run, they would slug it out with them up to the last man, and it showed. And there was a grudging respect for those Union troops in the Army of the Cumberland. And they said these men know what they're doing. They were very lethal and they were very tough. And that really was a good observation of an enemy. And they didn't just say that about anybody. They said it about the Union troops from Indiana and from Kansas and from Wisconsin. As a matter of fact, the highest ranking general from Wisconsin during the Civil War that was killed was Colonel Hans Haig. And he was killed by the soldiers from the Texas Brigade. He unfortunately was at the wrong place at the wrong time. And he was actually shot and killed by one of the soldiers of the Hood's Texas Brigade. Don't know which one, but he was.
Their grueling march across Pigeon Mountain on Friday, September 18th, brought Dashler's brigade to a wooded bivouac 4 miles southeast of Thedford's Ford. The men were spent, but rest was short-lived. At 7 a.m. the next morning, Sergeant W. W. Hartsill wrote that he could hear the distant rumble of artillery from the north. By 11:45, Dashler's men were on the move again, summoned to General Bragg's headquarters at the ford. At 4 p.m., Patrick Cleburne's division crossed West Chickamauga Creek. As Dashler's men passed General Nathan Bedford Forrest, calmly reading a book, Dr. James Wilkes asked if the day's fighting was done. Forrest looked up and replied,
"Do you see that body of infantry marching this way? That is Pat Cleburne's division. Hell will break loose in Georgia in about 15 minutes.
By 5:30, Dashler's brigade reached Jay's Mill and began forming along the road. As twilight deepened, Cleburne launched his attack. Dashler's Texans followed close behind A.P. Stewart's Tennesseans, then swept through them like a second wave. Dashler's Texans hit the right flank of the 77th Pennsylvania with devastating enfilade fire. A Federal historian later recalled, "The regiment was hemmed in on all sides. Caught in a crossfire, the 77th broke. 73 Pennsylvanians surrendered, including their colonel, Thomas Rose. As the line collapsed, Union forces pulled back under intense pressure. It was the last major clash of the day. In the darkening woods near Jay's Mill, Dashler's brigade had fought its first battle and won. The morning of Sunday, September 20th, 1863, broke cold and clear over the fields and forests of Chickamauga. The unexpected chill had gripped the Texans, who had spent a miserable night under arms, many still damp from fording the creek the previous day. Blankets and fires were scarce, and sleep even more so. Since their initial engagement early Saturday, General Matt Ector's Texans had remained in reserve, positioned behind the lines. But the lull would not last. By 10 a.m., General William Walker ordered a shift in the Confederate line. He formed Colonel Claudius Wilson's Georgia Brigade and Ector's Texans to relieve the battered brigade of Colonel Peyton Colquitt. Colquitt's command had suffered devastating losses in the early morning confusion when he mistook Union troops for General John Breckinridge's division of Confederates. That error had cost him not only a third of his brigade, but also his life. Ector's men, weary but eager, moved forward to take their place in the line, shoulder to shoulder with Wilson's Georgians, prepared to carry the fight into the heart of the Union position. As the sun climbed higher on the morning of September 20th, the fields and woods of Chickamauga echoed once again with the sounds of war. Around the same hour that General Ector's men were moving into position, another brutal confrontation was unfolding. Major General Patrick Cleburne, leading one of the hardest-hitting divisions in the Confederate Army, ordered Brigadier General James Dashler's Texas Brigade forward against the entrenched Union lines of General John Palmer's division from the 21st Corps. The Federal position was formidable, reinforced breastworks and makeshift redoubts, bolstered by both artillery and rifle fire. Still, Dashler's men advanced with determination. The Texans fought with ferocity through the dense woods and uneven ground, but the cost was staggering. Shells burst overhead, and musket balls tore through the ranks. Amidst the chaos, General Dashler, leading from the front as always, was struck down around midday. A single shell shattered his chest, killing him instantly. His death sent a jolt through the brigade. Yet even as their commander fell, the men of Dashler's brigade pressed on, refusing to yield. It was one of the bloodiest moments of the day, and one that forever marked the ground where they fought. The morning of September 20th, 1863, saw Hood's famed Texas Brigade redeployed northward by James Longstreet, who had arrived on the battlefield. The morning was cold, and the Texans had left all of their supplies and wagons back in Virginia, but prepared for the moment that could decide the battle. By about 10:55 a.m., the order was given. Robertson's men emerged from the timber near Brotherton Farm and surged across Lafayette Road into the open fields. A Union division had been mispositioned, unintentionally creating a gap. Texas fire erupted. Sergeant Val Giles, of the 4th Texas, later testified,
"We gave a rebel yell and ran at them with the bayonet. They couldn't stop us."
The Confederates streamed through the breach, taking artillery and captured ground. But as they pressed forward, Federal formations converged on their flanks. The Texans, now unprotected, found their advance grinding to a halt under withering crossfire.
It was the Robertson's Texas Brigade that actually went through the gap that was created in the Union line, and that really helped the Confederates win the victory at Chickamauga.
This is the spot where Confederate General John Bell Hood was struck down on the afternoon of September the 20th. While he and Jerome Robertson planned a counterattack, a ball slammed into his right leg. The wound was grave and would require amputation. This marked the final time that Hood would stand on the same battlefield as the Texas Brigade that proudly carried his name.
It was a very effective battle. However, the Rocky Chickamauga, George Thomas, was able to keep it from a complete rout. General Thomas's men were able to stall the Texans and the other Confederate unions to where there could be an effective retreat back to Chattanooga. If it wasn't for George Thomas, it would have been a complete and total Confederate victory.
Having apparently shattered the Union Army with a bold stroke of luck, the Union Army, having made a mistake, created a gap, and the Hood's Texans poured right through it, Longstreet is adamant that it is time then to drive on to seize Chattanooga before Thomas or anybody else can rally the troops and hold that vital railroad junction on the Tennessee River. Bragg demurs. Bragg says, "No, my army is in disarray. I do not know where the parts are. We have suffered heavy casualties." This infuriates Longstreet, who allegedly, and it appears in lots of sources, told someone close by that Bragg had an amazing ability to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. And so Bragg's inherent caution, his focus on lines of support, his insistence upon clean, neat organization and communication froze an already battered army in its tracks, allowing the Union Army time to regroup, get its breath back, and get a new commander in there named Ulysses S. Grant.
Though the fields and forests of Chickamauga ran red with blood, the battle ended in a hard-fought Confederate victory. But it was a victory that came at a terrible cost, and one that wasn't fully realized. General Bragg's failure to pursue the defeated Union Army allowed them to retreat safely into Chattanooga, a strategic city that would soon become the next great prize of the war. Bragg's hesitation turned what could have been a war-changing breakthrough into a missed opportunity. For the Texans of Ector's, Gregg's, Dashler's, and Robertson's brigades and Wharton's cavalry, the battle was over. But their war was far from done. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, and share it with fellow history buffs. And join us next time for more untold stories of Texans in the Civil War, here on Lone Star Warriors.